A billionaire spotted his former girlfriend with a baby at the airport, and when he discovered the child was his, everything shifted. Before we dive into all the details of this remarkable story, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything, and let's begin this journey together. Some choices feel final until life forces you to confront what you left behind. The departure board glowed with destinations. They looked like faraway dreams: Barcelona, Spain, shining in amber letters next to gate A14. Camille Rivera adjusted little Noah's small body against her chest, feeling the weight of more than just her 18-month-old son. The oversized navy hoodie she wore couldn't hide the exhaustion in her brown eyes, but it masked the fierce determination that had carried her this far. Silver Springs felt like another lifetime now. The cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper, the stack of overdue bills on the counter, the nights when Noah's cries echoed through thin walls while the neighbors complained. All of it was fading into memory as she clutched their boarding passes, 2 one-way tickets to a future she had built from nothing. Flight 212 to Barcelona will begin boarding in 30 minutes, the gate agent announced, her voice cutting through the terminal's commotion. Camille's phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. "Hope the move goes well. You are a good tenant," she almost smiled. Good tenant, code for paid rent on time, even while working 2 jobs and raising a baby alone. Noah stirred in her arms, his tiny fingers tugging at the worn fabric of her hoodie. Even asleep, his mixed features were striking: warm golden skin, soft curls, and those distinctive eyebrows that sometimes made Camille's breath catch. She pushed the thought away, just as she had for nearly 2 years. This was their escape, their new beginning. She found an empty seat near the window, setting down her overstuffed diaper bag. Inside were formula bottles, baby food pouches, diapers, wipes, and the letter from the consulting firm in Barcelona, her golden ticket. "Dear Miss Rivera, we are pleased to offer you the position of financial analyst." The salary was modest, but it came with something priceless: distance. Around her, the airport hummed with its usual symphony. Families reuniting, business travelers tapping away on laptops, elderly couples sharing coffee and quiet conversation. Everyone had someplace to go, someone waiting, or something to leave behind. Camille wasn't the only one running. 3 gates away, Adrian Cross stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, watching planes taxi across the tarmac. His tailored charcoal blazer fit perfectly, as did everything else in his carefully curated life. The keynote speech had gone well. Standing ovation, LinkedIn mentions piling up, another feather in his cap as one of San Francisco's youngest tech innovators. But today, success felt hollow, as it had for months, maybe years. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through congratulatory messages that meant absolutely nothing. His assistant had already booked his connection to Seattle for another conference. Another boardroom, another empty hotel room. The cycle never stopped, and lately, he wondered why he kept it spinning. "Mr. Cross, your flight to SEA has been delayed due to weather," his phone pinged with an airline notification. New departure time, 8:47 p.m., 3 hours to kill in an airport, the last place he wanted to be. Airports made him restless, reminded him of all the times he'd chosen business trips over. Over what? There was no one to choose anymore. No one to come home to. No one who cared if his flight was delayed. He turned from the window, scanning for a quiet corner where he could take calls and pretend to be busy. That's when he saw her. The world tilted. Camille. She sat 40 yards away, cradling someone in her arms. A child. A baby with features that made his chest tighten with impossible recognition. The curve of those tiny eyebrows, the way the little hand rested against Camille's chest. Adrian's hand found the wall beside him, steadying himself. His heart hammered against his ribs as fragments of memory crashed together. Their last fight, the things he'd said, the door slamming, the silence that had stretched into months, then years. He'd told himself she was better off without him. He'd buried himself in work, in success, in anything that didn't require him to face what he'd lost. But now, seeing her there with a child who looked like no. The baby couldn't be more than 1.5 years old, which meant his legs moved before his mind caught up, carrying him across the terminal toward a truth he wasn't ready to face. Some truths hit you like lightning. Sudden, blinding, and impossible to ignore. Each step toward her felt like walking through quicksand. Adrian's perfectly polished leather shoes clicked against the terminal floor, but the sound was muffled by the roar of blood in his ears. Business travelers brushed past him, pulling rolling suitcases and checking phones, oblivious to the earthquake happening inside his chest. Camille hadn't seen him yet. She was focused on the baby, their baby, his mind whispered, adjusting a tiny blue blanket around small shoulders. The tenderness in her movements, the way she instinctively swayed, even while seated, spoke of a mother's love born from countless sleepless nights and quiet moments he'd never shared. 20 feet away now, a flight attendant's voice echoed through the terminal. Final boarding call for Flight 218 to Denver. The mundane announcement felt surreal against the magnitude of what was unfolding. 15 feet. Camille glanced up, probably drawn by some sixth sense mothers develop. Their eyes met across the space between Gate A12 and Gate A14, and time folded in on itself. 2 years collapsed into nothing. The hurt, the anger, the silence, all of it written in the split second of recognition that passed between them. She didn't run, she didn't turn away, she just froze. Adrian stopped walking. They stared at each other across the terminal corridor, travelers flowing around them like water around stones. Her brown eyes held the same strength that had first captivated him, but now they carried something else, a weariness that made his chest ache. The baby chose that moment to wake up, letting out a soft whimper that sliced through the airport noise like a blade. Camille's attention immediately shifted to the child, her voice dropping to that universal mother's whisper. "Shh, Noah? It's okay, baby boy." Noah. The name hit him like a physical blow. Noah. Rest, comfort in Hebrew, the language Camille had been studying when they were together. She used to talk about teaching their future children to be bilingual, to embrace both cultures, back when they still talked about futures at all. He resumed walking, his feet moving of their own accord, 10 feet, 5, until he stood beside her row of seats, looking down at the two most important people he'd never really known. Camille. Her name came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by 2 years of not saying it aloud. She looked up at him, without surprise, as if she'd been expecting this moment, dreading it, maybe even rehearsing it in her mind. Adrian. The baby, Noah, turned his head at the sound of his voice, and Adrian's world tilted completely off its axis. The little boy had his eyes, not just the color, but the shape, the way they crinkled slightly at the corners. His tiny mouth formed a perfect bow, and when he smiled a sleepy, innocent smile, Adrian saw his mother's dimples. His knees almost buckled. "How old?" he whispered, though he already knew. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. 18 months, Camille said quietly, not looking away from his face. She was watching him put the pieces together, watching him realize what he'd missed. 18 months, which meant Camille had been pregnant when he'd walked out of her apartment after their biggest fight, when she'd begged him to stay, to work things out, to choose them over another business trip to Singapore, when he'd said he wasn't ready for the complications, wasn't ready to slow down, wasn't ready to be what she needed. She'd been carrying his child, and he'd left her to handle it alone. "You didn't tell me," he said, the words coming out like an accusation when he meant them as a question. Camille's eyes flashed. "I tried. You changed your number, had your assistant screen. Your calls made it very clear. You didn't want to be found." The memory crashed back. Those first few weeks after their breakup, when unknown numbers kept calling. He'd assumed they were reporters or business contacts and had his team handle them. He'd been so focused on avoiding anything that might pull him back into the emotional chaos he was trying to escape. "I called your office 17 times, Camille continued, her voice steady but sharp. "Left messages. Even showed up once. But security wouldn't let me pass the lobby without an appointment." Each word was a knife twist. He remembered the security protocols he'd put in place after a few overzealous business competitors had tried to ambush him. No visitors without pre-approval. No calls put through without screening. He'd built a fortress to protect his success and locked out the only thing that mattered. Flight 212 to Barcelona now boarding Group A, the gate agent announced. Camille stood, adjusting Noah against her hip with practiced ease. The baby grabbed at his mother's hoodie, babbling in that sweet, nonsensical way that made strangers smile in grocery stores. "You're leaving," Adrian said finally, the boarding announcement, the luggage tags, the finality of it all finally sinking in. "Yes, you can't." The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and desperate. Several nearby passengers glanced over, probably wondering if they were witnessing a domestic dispute. Camille's expression softened slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. "I can, and I am. We have a life to build, Adrian. One that doesn't include waiting for someone who already made his choice." She shifted Noah to her other hip and reached for her diaper bag. That's when Noah looked directly at him again, those familiar eyes studying his face with the serious intensity only babies possessed. And then he reached for him, little hands stretching toward a father he'd never met, recognizing something he couldn't possibly understand. A child's instinct can break through walls that years of anger have built. The moment stretched like pulled taffy, Noah's tiny hands reaching toward Adrian while his mother stood frozen between past and future. Around them, Gate A14 buzzed with boarding passengers, but the three of them existed in their own suspended universe. Adrian's hands trembled as he looked at those small fingers stretching toward him. Every instinct screamed to reach back, to touch his son for the first time. But Camille's protective stance reminded him he'd forfeited that right long ago. "He does that with everyone," Camille said quickly, though her voice caught on the lie. Noah was typically shy. With strangers, he usually clung to her in grocery stores and doctor's offices. But Noah kept reaching, making soft cooing sounds that cut straight through Adrian's carefully constructed defenses. The baby's persistence was heartbreaking, as if some primal part of him recognized the genetic connection his conscious mind couldn't comprehend. "Group B passengers may now board Flight 212 to Barcelona," came the announcement. Camille fumbled in her jacket pocket for their boarding passes, her movements jerky with anxiety. "That's us," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Wait," Adrian's voice cracked. "Please, just wait." She paused but didn't turn around. Noah, however, twisted in her arms to keep looking at him, those dark eyes, his eyes wide with curiosity. "What do you want me to say, Adrian?" Camille's shoulders sagged. "That I forgive you? That 18 months of doing this alone doesn't matter, because you showed up at the last minute?" He stepped closer, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her shampoo. Coconut and vanilla, the same brand she'd used when they lived together. Close enough to see the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes. "I want to explain." "Explain what?" She whirled to face him, and Noah clapped his hands at the sudden movement, delighted by the drama he couldn't understand. "That you were too busy building your empire to answer 17 phone calls? That your success was more important than us?" The words hit like physical blows, each one deserved, each one true. "You're right," he said quietly, "about all of it." The admission seemed to deflate some of her anger. She'd been prepared for arguments, for excuses, for the classic Adrian charm offensive. She hadn't expected surrender. "Group C passengers for Flight 212 to Barcelona," the gate agent called. More passengers moved past them, wheeling luggage and checking phones. An elderly couple smiled at Noah, who was now babbling happily and waving at everyone within sight. The normalcy of it all felt surreal against the emotional earthquake happening between his parents. "I was terrified," Adrian continued, his voice barely audible above the terminal noise. "Of failing. Of not being enough. My father left when I was 8, and I swore I'd never put a kid through that. So when things got serious between us, when you started talking about marriage, kids, a future," he rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture Camille remembered from their hardest conversations. "I panicked. Thought it was better to leave before I could screw it up. Before I could become him." "So you became him anyway," Camille said softly, "just faster." The truth of it sat between them like a third person. Noah, oblivious to the weight of the moment, had discovered the zipper on Adrian's jacket and was trying to grab it, leaning forward in his mother's arms with determined focus. "He's beautiful," he whispered, watching his son's concentrated effort. "He looks like you. Everyone says so." Camille's voice held no accusation now, just bone-deep wariness. "The pediatrician, the daycare workers, strangers at the grocery store. Oh, he definitely has his daddy's eyes." and I just smile and change the subject. A gate agent approached them. "Ma'am, are you boarding flight 2112? We're in final boarding now." Camille looked at her boarding passes, then at Noah, then at Adrian. For a moment, something flickered in her expression, uncertainty, maybe even hope. "Give me 5 minutes," she told the agent. The woman nodded and walked away, speaking into her radio about a delayed passenger. 5 minutes, Camille said to Adrian. "That's what you get. 5 minutes to say whatever you came here to say." Noah chose that moment to break free from his mother's careful grip, lunging forward with surprising strength. Instinctively, Adrian caught him, his hands closing around the little boy's small torso to keep him from falling. The moment their skin touched, father and son for the first time, everything else fell away. Noah giggled, a sound like silver bells, and placed his small palm flat against Adrian's chest, right over his heart. And for the first time in 2 years, that heart felt like it might actually be worth something. Sometimes a lifetime of decisions comes down to a single moment of truth. Holding Noah was like holding his own heart outside his chest, terrifying and perfect and utterly overwhelming. He weighed almost nothing, but his presence filled every empty space inside Adrian he'd pretended didn't exist. His tiny hand remained pressed against Adrian's shirt, and he wondered if Noah could feel how frantically his pulse was racing. "He's not afraid of you," Camille observed, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and concern. "He should be. He doesn't know strangers." But Noah seemed completely at ease, studying Adrian's face with those serious dark eyes, occasionally reaching up to pat his cheek with the gentle curiosity of someone discovering something precious. When Adrian smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one he wore in boardrooms, Noah giggled and clapped his hands. 4 minutes, Camille said quietly, glancing at the gate where the last stragglers were boarding. Adrian carefully shifted Noah in his arms, supporting his head the way he'd seen parents do in movies, though he'd never imagined himself in this role. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I lost that when I walked away." "You did," Camille agreed, but her tone had softened, watching him hold their son with such careful reverence. "But I'm asking anyway." He looked up from Noah to meet Camille's eyes. "Don't take him away. Not like this. Not when I just found out he exists." "I'm not taking him away," she said, her voice steady. "I'm building him a life, a stable life with opportunities. I could never give him that in Silver Springs." Camille's voice grew stronger, more determined. "Do you know what I've been doing for the past 18 months? Working 2 jobs while he was in daycare, staying up until 2 in the morning balancing books for a catering company just to make rent, choosing between buying his medicine and paying the electric bill." Each word was a knife twist of guilt. While she'd been struggling to survive, he'd been closing million-dollar deals and staying in 5-star hotels. "The job in Barcelona pays enough for us to live comfortably. He'll grow up bilingual, travel, see the world. He'll never have to worry about whether there's food in the refrigerator." "I could," Adrian started, then stopped himself. "Money. Of course." His first instinct was to throw money at the problem. That was all he knew how to do. "You could what?" Camille asked. "Write a check? Buy us a house?" She shook her head. "This isn't about money, Adrian. It never was." Noah had discovered the collar of his shirt and was exploring it with the methodical thoroughness of a tiny scientist. He seemed utterly content in Adrian's arms, occasionally looking between him and Camille as if trying to understand the tension in the air. "Then what?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "What is it about?" "It's about showing up," Camille said simply. "Not when it's convenient, not when your schedule allows it. Every day. For fevers at 3 in the morning and teething pain and the first time he says mama. For all the moments that aren't Instagram-worthy or LinkedIn material." A gate agent was walking toward them, clearly preparing to make a final boarding call announcement. "I can do that," Adrian said desperately. "I want to do that." "Do you?" Camille's voice held a lifetime of disappointment. "Because wanting and doing are different things. You wanted us before, remember? You wanted marriage, a family, Sunday mornings sleeping in, until you didn't. Until Singapore was more important. Until building your brand mattered more than building a life." The memories crashed over him. Every time he'd chosen work over her. the anniversary dinner he'd canceled for a client meeting, the weekend getaway he'd sacrificed for a conference call, the slow erosion of trust that had led to their final explosive fight. "I was different then," he said, though the words sounded weak even to him. "Were you?" Camille asked quietly. "Or were you just younger and better at making promises you couldn't keep?" Noah squirmed in his arms, and he automatically adjusted his hold, swaying slightly the way Camille had been doing earlier. The motion seemed to calm the baby, and he settled against Adrian's chest with a contented sigh. The gesture wasn't lost on Camille. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. He saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, the one who used to look at him like he hung the stars. "She likes you," Camille whispered, and there was pain in her voice, as if she'd been hoping Noah would reject him, making this decision easier. Final boarding call for Flight 2112 to Barcelona. All passengers must board immediately. The announcement echoed through the terminal. Camille took a shaky breath and reached for Noah. "We have to go." But as she tried to take the baby, Noah wrapped his tiny fists around Adrian's shirt and held on, making distressed sounds when Camille tried to pull him away. Even at 18 months old, Noah Rivera knew exactly what his heart wanted. Sometimes a baby's wisdom cuts deeper than a lifetime of adult reasoning. Noah's small hands gripped Adrian's shirt like his life depended on it, his face scrunching up in the way that always preceded a full meltdown. The sound he made wasn't quite crying yet, but it was the warning of tears to come. That heartbreaking whimper that made every adult within earshot want to fix whatever was wrong. "Noah, baby, come to Mama," Camille coaxed, her voice strained with the pressure of a dozen boarding passengers watching their family drama unfold. "We have to go on the airplane, remember? Like we talked about." But Noah only held tighter, burying his face against Adrian's chest as if he could disappear into the safety of his embrace. His small body trembled with the effort of clinging to this stranger who somehow felt like home. "He's never done this before," Camille said more to herself than to him. "He's usually so good with transitions." Adrian found himself swaying gently, his body moving in an instinctive rhythm he'd never learned but somehow knew. "Hey there, little star," he whispered against Noah's soft curls. "It's okay. Everything's okay." The pet name slipped out before he could stop it. Little Star, the English translation of Noah. Noah looked up at him with those impossibly wise eyes, as if he understood not just the words but the love behind them. "Sir, ma'am," the gate agent approached with barely concealed frustration. "I really need to close this gate. The pilot is asking about the delay." Camille's hands shook as she reached for Noah again. "Come on, sweetheart. We have our new adventure waiting. Remember? The airplane and the new house with the pretty balcony." This time, when she tried to lift him, Noah began to cry in earnest. Not the angry wail of a tantrum, but the broken-hearted sob of someone losing something precious. The sound cut through the terminal noise like a siren, causing other passengers to pause and look with concern. "I'm sorry," Camille said to the crowd of onlookers, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "He's just tired, travel day, you know." But Adrian could see it in her eyes. The doubt creeping in, a mother's intuition that something bigger was happening here. Something that couldn't be explained away by fatigue or hunger or the usual disruptions that made babies fuss. "Ma'am, I really need you to board now," the gate agent pressed. "We have a schedule to maintain." "Give him to me," Camille said firmly. But when she pulled Noah away from Adrian, the baby's cries intensified to heartbreaking wails. Noah reached back toward him desperately, his small hands opening and closing in the universal gesture of want, need. "Please." Adrian felt something crack open in his chest. Not break, but open, like a door he'd kept locked for years, suddenly swinging wide. Looking at his son's tear-streaked face, seeing his distress at being separated from him, he understood with crystal clarity that every choice he'd made, every priority he'd held sacred, had led him to this moment. And every single one of those choices had been wrong. "Camille," he said quietly, his voice cutting through Noah's cries, "what if you didn't go?" She paused, Noah still sobbing in her arms. "What? What if you stayed? What if we tried to figure this out together?" "Adrian." "Not as a couple," he said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. "As parents, as two people who love this little boy and want what's best for him. Camille looked down at Noah, who had quieted to hiccuping sniffles but was still reaching toward Adrian with desperate persistence. I have a job, a contract. They're expecting me. I could make some calls, Adrian said, then immediately regretted the words. There he was again, thinking money could solve everything. But Camille's response surprised him. It's not about the job, she said slowly. It's about trust. How do I know you won't disappear again? The moment things get hard? The moment Noah gets sick, or I need you at 3 in the morning, or your business needs you more than we do. It was a fair question, the most important question, really. You don't, he admitted. You have no reason to trust me. He glanced at Noah, who had gone quiet, watching their conversation with the intense focus babies sometimes displayed as if he could understand every word. But he does, Adrian said softly. They both looked at Noah, who reached out again, this time more calmly, his little hand resting on Camille's shoulder. Maybe that's enough to start with, Adrian continued. Maybe trust isn't something I can promise you. Maybe it's something I have to prove. One day at a time. The gate agent was making frantic gestures to someone behind the counter. In another minute, maybe less, she would close the gate, whether Camille was on the plane or not. Camille closed her eyes, Noah's weight solid and warm in her arms. The boarding pass crumpled in her free hand. When she opened them again, Adrian saw the exact moment her careful plans began to unravel. To crumble. Some decisions require you to choose between the life you planned and the life that's calling you. Camille stood frozen at the crossroads of her carefully constructed future, Noah's warm weight in her arms, anchoring her to a moment that would define everything that came next. The boarding pass in her hand felt like tissue paper. Fragile, temporary, easily torn. Around them, Gate A14 had grown quiet, except for the soft hum of cleaning equipment as maintenance crews prepared for the next flight. The Barcelona plane was backing away from the jetway, its lights blinking like distant stars, carrying away the life she'd imagined for herself and Noah. Ma'am, the gate agent approached cautiously, her earlier impatience replaced by something gentler. I'm sorry, but the aircraft has departed. Can help you rebook on tomorrow's flight if you'd like. Tomorrow's flight, as if this decision could be postponed, reconsidered, made easier with a night's sleep. Camille's voice cracked. She looked down at Noah, who had quieted completely, dark eyes moving between his parents as if sensing the magnitude of what was happening. You don't have to decide anything right now, Adrian said softly, though his hands trembled with the effort of not reaching for them both. You could stay tonight. Think it through. I could get you a hotel room, and we could. Stop. Camille held up her free hand. Just stop trying to fix this with logistics and money. This isn't a business deal you can negotiate. He fell silent, chastened. She was right, of course. This was exactly what he'd always done. Tried to solve emotional problems with practical solutions, thinking he could budget his way out of feelings. Camille walked to the now empty gate seating area and sank into a chair, Noah settling easily into her lap. The baby seemed content now that the crisis had passed, playing with the zipper on his mother's hoodie with focused concentration. Tell me about the last 18 months, Adrian said, taking the seat across from them. Tell me what I missed. Camille looked up, surprised by the request. She'd expected more persuasion, more promises, more of the smooth talking that had once swept her off her feet. You really want to know everything? She was quiet for a long moment, watching Noah's tiny fingers work the zipper up and down with determined precision. His first word was, Mama, she said finally. 3 weeks ago. I was making breakfast, scrambled eggs, his favorite, and he just looked at me from his high chair and said it, clear as day. Adrian's throat tightened. What else? He took his first steps, holding onto the coffee table at Mrs. Delgado's house. That's our neighbor. She watches Noah sometimes when I have to work late. He was trying to reach a toy that had rolled under the couch, and he just let go and took 3 wobbly steps. Each milestone felt like a small knife to his chest. First word, first steps. All the moments parents treasured, happening in apartments and neighbors' houses while he'd been in conference rooms and corner offices. She has this thing where he won't sleep unless I'm humming, Camille continued, her voice growing softer. Not singing, just humming. It started when he was tiny and had colic. I'd walk the floors at 2 in the morning, humming whatever song was stuck in my head, and eventually he'd settle. Now, it's our routine. What songs? A small smile crossed Camille's face. Silly ones mostly. That old Stevie Wonder song you used to play when you cooked breakfast on Sundays. Isn't she lovely? Sometimes Beatles songs. He seems to like Here Comes the Sun. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Lazy Sunday mornings in Camille's tiny kitchen, making pancakes while she sat on the counter in one of his old t-shirts, both of them humming along to whatever vintage playlist he'd put on. Back when the future had seemed infinite and uncomplicated. He's starting to be afraid of strangers, Camille went on. The pediatrician says it's normal at this age, but it makes things harder. Daycare drop-offs are getting rough. He clings to you like he did to me just now, Adrian finished quietly. Yeah. Camille's eyes met his. Which doesn't make sense. He's never done that with anyone else, not even Mrs. Delgado. And Noah sees her twice a week. They sat in silence, watching Noah discover that the zipper made a soft musical sound when pulled slowly. The little boy was completely absorbed in his exploration, occasionally looking up to make sure both adults were still there, as if confirming that this strange new dynamic was stable. I'm scared, Camille admitted suddenly. Of what? Of believing you, of letting myself hope that this time will be different. She looked directly at him, and he saw all the vulnerability she'd been hiding behind anger and practical decisions. I survived you leaving once. I built a life for us from nothing. I can't do that again. You won't have to, Adrian said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. I know I have no right to ask you to trust me, but I'm asking anyway, for him. Noah chose that moment to look up at him and smile. A full, dimpled smile that transformed his entire face. He clapped his hands together once, a gesture of pure joy, then reached for him again. This time, Camille didn't stop him. And in that moment, letting her son choose, Camille made the most terrifying decision of her life. The most profound journeys begin with a single act of faith. Noah settled into Adrian's arms like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. His small hands immediately found the lapels of Adrian's blazer, and he began his methodical exploration. Touching the fabric, examining the buttons, discovering the texture of his watchband with the focused intensity that only babies possessed. He's heavier than he looks, Adrian said softly, adjusting his hold. The weight was perfect, substantial, real in a way that made everything else fade into background noise. 13 months of growing, Camille replied, though her voice carried an edge of nervousness. She was watching him hold their son with the hawk-like attention of a mother ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. Around them, the airport continued its endless rhythm. New passengers were already gathering for the next flight to somewhere else, dragging rolling suitcases and checking phones, oblivious to the small miracle happening in the seating area of Gate A14. What happens now? Adrian asked. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to voice. I don't know, Camille admitted. I've been planning this move for 8 months. Sold most of our furniture. Gave notice at both jobs. Mrs. Delgado is expecting us to be halfway across the Atlantic by now. The practical realities were starting to sink in. The logistics of a life suddenly derailed. The complications of staying when everything had been arranged for leaving. Where were you staying tonight? Adrian asked. Before the flight? We weren't. Camille rubbed her forehead with the back of her hand. We checked out of the apartment yesterday morning. Spent last night at Mrs. Delgado's house. All our stuff is in storage, except for what's in these bags. Noah had discovered Adrian's tie and was attempting to put the silk fabric in his mouth. In a move that was almost comically synchronized, both parents reached to stop him. Their hands touched as they both grasped the tie, and for a moment, they were just two people, protecting their child from choking on expensive menswear. Sorry, Camille said, pulling her hand back. He puts everything in his mouth right now. It's this phase where... You don't have to apologize, Adrian said gently. Or explain. I want to learn this stuff. The sincerity in his voice made something shift in Camille's expression. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of possibility. He needs dinner soon, Camille said, glancing at her phone, and a bath. He gets cranky if his routine gets too disrupted. Okay. Adrian looked around the terminal as if restaurants and bathtubs might materialize if he concentrated hard enough. There's got to be baby-friendly food somewhere here. And I could get us hotel rooms, separate rooms, he added quickly, seeing the wariness creep back into her eyes. Adrian. Camille's voice was gentle but firm. You can't just throw money at this and make it simple. This isn't about hotels or restaurants. This is about whether you're ready to be a father. Really ready. Not just the fun parts. Not just when it's convenient. Noah chose that moment to let out a small whimper, squirming in Adrian's arms with the particular restlessness that signaled an approaching meltdown. His lower lip trembled in that heartbreaking way that always preceded tears. Tired, Camille said immediately, shifting into mother mode. And hungry. He usually has dinner at 5:30. Adrian looked at his son's scrunched-up face and felt panic rise in his chest. He had no idea how to comfort a baby, no experience with the mysterious needs and signals that Camille read like a second language. What do I do? He asked, voice tight with worry. Bounce gently, Camille instructed. Like this. She demonstrated a subtle swaying motion. And talk to him. He likes voices. Adrian tried to mimic her movements, swaying awkwardly while Noah's whimpers grew more insistent. Hey, little star, he said, his voice uncertain. It's okay. Daddy's here. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Daddy. It felt foreign on his tongue, too big and important for someone who'd been a father for all of 20 minutes. But Noah seemed to like it. His crying softened to sniffles, and he looked up at Adrian with those serious dark eyes, as if evaluating whether this new person could be trusted with his tears. Daddy's here, he repeated, more confidently this time. And Mama's here too. We're both here. Camille watched this interaction with an expression he couldn't read, part amazement, part terror, part something that might have been hope. He responds to routine, Camille said quietly. Consistency. He needs to know what to expect. I can do routine, Adrian said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. His life had been built around adaptability, constant travel, changing schedules. Can you? Camille asked softly. Because he needs dinner every night at 5:30, bath time at 7, bedtime stories, and that humming I told you about. He needs doctor appointments and grocery store trips, and someone to sing to him when he has nightmares. Each item on the list felt like a test, a challenge to prove he understood what he was signing up for. He needs someone who shows up, Camille continued. Every day, even when it's boring, even when there's no reward except a sleepy smile and tiny arms around your neck. Adrian looked down at Noah, who had settled completely now, content to explore the buttons on his shirt with drowsy fingers. The trust in his expression was absolute, devastating, completely unearned. I want to show up, Adrian said simply. I want to be the person he thinks I am when he looks at me like that. And maybe, for the first time in his life, wanting it would be enough to make it true. The hardest lessons are taught by the smallest teachers. The hotel suite overlooking downtown Seattle felt like neutral territory, expensive enough to be comfortable, temporary enough to avoid feeling like a commitment. Adrian had booked connecting rooms, giving Camille her space while keeping Noah close enough that his occasional babbles drifted through the shared door. It was 6:47 p.m., and they'd just survived their first family dinner together. Family dinner was perhaps too generous a term for the chaos that had unfolded in the hotel restaurant. Noah had thrown most of his pureed sweet potato at Adrian's shirt, cried when a waiter dropped a tray 3 tables away, and fallen asleep face first in his high chair just as their entrees arrived. But they'd navigated it together, Camille calmly cleaning orange goop from his sleeve while he figured out how to hold a sleeping baby and eat pasta. Simultaneously, now Noah was awake again, freshly bathed and wearing the tiny pajamas with moons and stars that Camille had packed for their cross-country journey. He sat on the carpet between his parents, surrounded by the few toys that had survived their packing purge. A stuffed elephant, some plastic rings, and a board book with chewed corners. He's fighting sleep, Camille observed, watching Noah rub his eyes while determinedly playing with the elephant. He does this when he's overtired, gets a second wine that makes bedtime impossible. Adrian studied his son's face, trying to memorize the signs Camille read so easily. The way Noah's movements became more jerky when he was tired, how his usually focused attention scattered when he needed rest. "What do we do?" he asked. "We wait it out, try to keep him calm until the crash comes." Camille settled cross-legged on the floor, her back against the couch. "Sometimes I sing to him. Sometimes we just sit quietly until he's ready." "Sing what?" "Anything. He's not picky about quality." Camille's mouth curved in a small smile. "Though he definitely has preferences. He likes that Stevie Wonder song you mentioned, and there's this lullaby my grandmother used to sing." She began humming softly, a melody Adrian didn't recognize, but that seemed to come from somewhere deep and old. Noah immediately turned toward the sound, his restless movements slowing as he listened. Adrian found himself leaning back against the opposite couch, watching Camille hum to their son in a hotel room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and someone else's dreams. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but there was something achingly beautiful about the simplicity of it. "My turn," he said when Camille's humming faded. She looked surprised. "You don't have to. I want to try." He cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. He'd given presentations to boardrooms full of investors, pitched ideas to Fortune 500 CEOs, but singing to a 1-year-old felt more terrifying than any of that. "Isn't she lovely?" he began tentatively, his voice rough and uncertain. "Isn't she wonderful?" Noah's head whipped around to stare at him, those dark eyes wide with interest. He crawled closer, abandoning his elephant to focus entirely on this new entertainment. "Isn't she precious?" Adrian continued, gaining confidence as Noah settled at his feet, looking up at him with rapt attention. Less than 1 minute old. By the time he reached the chorus, Noah was swaying slightly, his eyelids heavy but fighting to stay open. When he finished, Noah clapped his hands together once and made a sound that might have been approval. "He likes your voice," Camille said softly, and there was something in her tone that made him look at her more closely. "What is it?" "Nothing. She shook her head. "I used to imagine this when I was pregnant. Before everything fell apart, I pictured you singing to him, teaching him songs, being the kind of father who knew all the words to lullabies." The admission hung between them, heavy with lost possibilities. "I'm sorry," Adrian said quietly, "for all the things you had to imagine alone." Noah had given up his fight against sleep, curling up on the carpet with his elephant clutched to his chest. Her breathing had deepened, and his tiny fist was slowly relaxing its grip on the toy. "Should we move him to the crib?" Adrian whispered. "Not yet. He's not fully out. If we move him now, he'll wake up, and we'll start all over." So they waited. 2 adults sitting on a hotel room floor, guarding their sleeping son like he was made of spun glass. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken things. "Adrian," Camille said finally, her voice barely audible. "What if this doesn't work? What if you try for a few weeks and realize you're not cut out for this? What if Noah gets attached and then you decide your old life was easier?" It was the question that had been lurking underneath everything, the fear that made her shoulders tense whenever he held Noah, the doubt that shadowed every moment of progress they made. "What if it does work?" he countered gently. "What if I'm better at this than either of us expects? What if the 3 of us figure out how to be a family, even if it doesn't look like what we planned?" Camille looked down at Noah, peaceful in sleep, completely trusting that the adults in his world would keep him safe. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to let you in without losing myself again." "Maybe," Adrian said carefully, "we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Maybe we just take it one day at a time, one lullaby at a time." Noah stirred in his sleep, a tiny smile crossing his face, as if even in dreams, he knew his parents were finally learning how to love him together. Real love isn't proven in perfect moments. It's forged in the ones that break you open. The crying started at 2:47 a.m., cutting through the hotel's soundproofing like a siren in the night. Adrian bolted upright in his bed, heart racing with that primal panic that comes from being awakened by distress you can't immediately locate. Through the connecting door, he could hear movement, Camille's soft voice, footsteps on carpet, the sound of someone who'd done this dance many times before. "Shh, baby. What's wrong?" "You're burning up." "Burning up." Adrian was out of bed and through the connecting door before his conscious mind caught up with his body. He found Camille pacing the room in an oversized t-shirt, Noah pressed against her shoulder, both of them looking miserable in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. "He has a fever," Camille said without looking at him, her voice tight with the controlled panic only mothers knew. "It came on fast. He was fine when I put him down, but now he feels like he's on fire." Noah's cries were different from earlier, not the angry wails of tiredness or hunger, but the weak, pitiful sounds of a sick child. His usually bright eyes were glassy, and even in the low light, Adrian could see the flush across his cheeks. "What do we do?" he asked, moving closer. "I have infant Tylenol in the diaper bag, but I already gave him some an hour ago." "It's not helping." Camille's voice cracked slightly. "He's never had a fever this high before. I don't know if I should call a doctor or take him to the emergency room or—" "Hey." Adrian placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Breathe. We'll figure this out." But privately, he was terrified. This tiny person he'd just met was suffering, and he had no idea how to help him. All his money, all his success, all his carefully cultivated competence. None of it meant anything in the face of a sick baby at 3 in the morning. "Maybe we should call someone," he said. "A pediatrician? The hotel doctor?" "It's the middle of the night, Adrian, and he's not their patient. I don't even know if our insurance—" Camille trailed off, the weight of their complicated situation settling over both of them. Noah's cries intensified, and Camille resumed her pacing, bouncing gently while murmuring reassurances that sounded more like prayers. "I know, sweetheart. I know you don't feel good. Mama's here. Mama's got you." Adrian watched them move through the small space, feeling utterly helpless. This was what Camille had been trying to tell him, that being a parent wasn't about the good moments, the Instagram-worthy memories. It was about nights like this when your child was hurting and you'd give anything to take their pain away, but couldn't. "Let me hold him," he said suddenly. Camille paused. "Adrian, he's really upset. He might not want—" "Please." He stepped closer, arms outstretched. "Let me try." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she carefully transferred Noah into his arms. The baby felt impossibly hot against his chest, his small body rigid with discomfort. He continued crying, but there was something different about it now. Less frantic, maybe, as if he sensed a change in energy. "Hey, little star," Adrian whispered, beginning the gentle swaying motion Camille had taught him. "I know you feel awful. I know everything hurts." He walked to the window, Noah in his arms, looking out at the city lights below. Seattle stretched out beneath them, millions of people sleeping peacefully while their world contracted to this one small room and one sick child. "When I was 7, he said softly, talking more to Noah than to Camille, "I got pneumonia. Really sick. My mom sat up with me for 3 nights straight, just like this. She sang to me and told me stories and promised me that feeling bad doesn't last forever." Noah's crying had quieted to whimpers, his hot cheek pressed against Adrian's chest. Whether it was his voice, his warmth, or simply exhaustion, something was calming him. "She was right," he continued, swaying by the window. "Nothing lasts forever. Not the bad stuff, not the good stuff. But love, that's the thing that carries you through until tomorrow feels possible again." Behind him, he heard Camille's sharp intake of breath, but he didn't turn around. He was afraid that if he stopped talking, stopped moving, Noah would start crying again. "I wasn't there for your first word," Adrian whispered to his son, "or your first steps, or any of the days when you needed me before now. But I'm here tonight, and I'll be here tomorrow night, and the night after that, for as long as you'll let me." Noah had gone completely quiet now, his breathing deep and even against Adrian's chest. The fever was still there. He could feel the heat radiating through the little boy's body. But something had shifted. Some crisis had passed. "Is he asleep?" Camille asked quietly. Adrian looked down at Noah's face, peaceful now, despite the flush in his cheeks. "I think so." "How did you?" "He never calms down that fast when he's sick. Usually he cries for hours." He turned to face her, still holding Noah carefully against his chest. "Maybe he just needed to know I wasn't going anywhere." Camille let out a long breath but didn't look convinced. She rubbed her temples, trying to ease the dull ache that had settled behind her eyes. Her voice was low, almost apologetic. "I don't know why this feels so much harder than it should. I've done this alone so many nights, but having you here, I keep waiting to feel relieved, and instead I feel like I'm failing." Adrian shifted Noah carefully and tried to meet her gaze. "You're not failing." "Maybe," she whispered, "but it doesn't feel like I'm doing enough." She closed her eyes for a moment, pressing her palm over her chest as if to steady her breathing. "And part of me still wonders if letting you in was a mistake. If needing you again is just—" She didn't finish the thought. "Maybe he just needed to know I wasn't going anywhere." They stood there in the dim hotel room, 3 a.m., heavy around them like a blanket. Outside, the city hummed its sleepless song. But inside this small space, there was only the sound of a baby's breathing and two adults learning what it meant to put someone else's well-being before their own. "The fever's breaking," Camille said, reaching out to touch Noah's forehead. "He's still warm, but not like before." "Should we put him back in the crib?" "Not yet. Sometimes they spike again. I usually hold him for a while just to be sure." So Adrian continued his gentle swaying, Noah safe in his arms, while Camille settled into the chair beside them. Neither of them spoke about going back to their separate beds. Some nights required presence more than sleep, and in the quiet that followed, both of them understood that they had crossed a line from which there would be no returning. Sometimes the biggest leap of faith is believing that broken people can learn to love whole. The way he smiled at Noah's mischievous grin made something crack open in Camille's chest. She'd been braced for frustration, for signs that the reality of parenting was already wearing thin. "Last night," she said carefully, "when he was sick, I meant every word." Adrian's voice was steady, certain. "I know you have no reason to believe me. I know I have to prove it every day. But Camille," holding him while he cried, knowing he needed me and being able to help, "that was the most important thing I've ever done." Noah banged his hands on the high chair tray, demanding attention from both adults. When they looked at him, he beamed, revealing 4 tiny teeth and those devastating dimples. "He's going to have you wrapped around his finger," Camille observed, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. "He already does." Adrian reached over to wipe banana from Noah's chin with a gentleness that made Camille's heart stutter. "You both do." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Adrian," Camille started, then stopped. "How do you tell someone that you're terrified of wanting something you've already lost once? How do you explain that hope feels more dangerous than despair?" For a moment, she thought about how little she'd slept, about the headache that had started behind her eyes and refused to fade, about the way her hands had trembled when she'd made Noah's bottle that morning. She'd done everything alone for so long that sharing the burden now felt almost like weakness, like letting herself believe in something she wasn't sure she deserved. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know," he said softly. "I know it's not enough to say I've changed. I know sorry doesn't undo 2 years of you doing this alone. But if you give me these 2 weeks, if you let me show you instead of tell you, maybe we can figure out what comes next." Noah had finished demolishing his breakfast and was now reaching for everything within his grasp: salt shakers, napkins, Adrian's phone. Each grab was accompanied by delighted squeals, as if the simple act of exploration was the most fascinating thing in the world. "He needs stability," Camille said, watching their son's joyful chaos. "Routine. A home that doesn't change every few weeks." "Then we'll give him that," Adrian said immediately. "I'll buy a house, wherever you want. Silver Springs, if that's what feels like home to you, or somewhere new, where we can start fresh." "You can't just buy your way into being a family," Camille said. "I know." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But I can use what I have to build the foundation, and then I can show up every day to make it a home." Noah had managed to grab Camille's phone and was gnawing on the corner with determined focus. Both parents moved to rescue the device, and this time, when their hands touched, neither pulled away. 2 weeks, Camille repeated, as if testing how the words felt. 2 weeks, and if at the end of that time you still want to go back to your old life, if you decide I'm not cut out for this, I'll help you go. I'll make sure you and Noah are set up, and I'll visit as often as you'll let me. Let me. It was the promise she needed to hear. That choosing to try didn't mean being trapped. That giving him a chance didn't mean giving up her agency. "And if we stay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "If you stay, then we figure out how to be the parents he deserves. Not the couple we used to be, but the family we could become." Noah, oblivious to the magnitude of the conversation happening around him, had discovered the fascinating texture of Adrian's sleeve and was exploring it with the focused intensity of a tiny scientist. He looked up at both his parents and clapped his hands once, as if giving his approval to whatever they were deciding. Camille looked at her son, this perfect little person who had somehow managed to bring together two people who had given up on each other. Noah's eyes held such trust, such uncomplicated love for both the mother who had raised him and the father he was just beginning to know. And for a split second, Camille felt the familiar surge of doubt, wondering if she was strong enough to let herself hope again. If she was foolish to believe that this time would be different. The thought pressed against her ribs, heavy and unwelcome, but she drew in a slow breath and tried to let it pass. "Okay," Camille said finally, the word coming out on a shaky breath. 2 weeks. Adrian's face transformed, relief and joy and something that looked like reverence washing over his features. "Okay." Noah babbled something that sounded suspiciously like approval, then reached for both his parents with greedy hands, as if he could somehow pull them into the same space, the same moment, the same future. And maybe, just maybe, he could. 6 months later. Some stories don't end with perfect. They end with real. The farmer's market in Silver Springs bustled with Saturday morning energy, vendors hawking fresh produce and homemade bread while children chased each other between the stalls. Camille pushed Noah's stroller through the crowd, weaving between families and couples with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here. "Dada," Noah squealed, pointing with sticky fingers toward the organic apple stand where Adrian stood in animated conversation with Mrs. Delgado, the elderly woman who sold the best honey in 3 counties. He looked different now, still polished, but softer around the edges. His jeans had a small stain on the knee from Noah's breakfast adventures, and his hair was slightly mussed from their earlier game of peekaboo. When he caught sight of them approaching, his entire face lit up with the kind of joy that couldn't be manufactured or performed. "There are my loves," he said, jogging over to plant a kiss on Noah's head before catching Camille's eye with a smile that still made her stomach flutter. "Mrs. Delgado was just telling me about her grandson's piano recital. Apparently, Noah's going to need music lessons soon." "He's 18 months old, Adrian," Camille laughed, but she was already picturing their son at a tiny piano, those serious dark eyes focused on making music. "Never too early to plan," he said, lifting Noah from his stroller and settling him on his shoulders. She immediately grabbed handfuls of his hair, squealing with delight at her new vantage point. They walked through the market like that, Adrian carrying Noah while he babbled commentary on everything he saw, Camille selecting vegetables for the week ahead. It was domestic and ordinary, and exactly what she'd never dared to dream they could have. The house had been Adrian's first major purchase after Noah's fever broke his resistance to anything that wasn't temporary. Nothing ostentatious. A modest 3-bedroom craftsman with a front porch and a backyard big enough for a swing set. Camille had been terrified when he'd suggested buying it, afraid of what it would mean to put down roots together. But Noah had taken his first independent steps in that living room, chasing a ball across the hardwood floors while both his parents cheered from opposite corners. He'd said "Dada" for the first time in the kitchen, while Adrian was making pancakes on a lazy Sunday morning, flour dusting his shirt and pure wonder on his face. "Remember when you thought you weren't cut out for this?" Camille teased now, watching him automatically adjust his grip when Noah leaned too far to one side. "I still think that sometimes," he admitted. "Usually around 2 a.m. when he's teething and nothing I do helps." "But you stay anyway." "I stay anyway." He looked at her over Noah's head, his expression serious. "I'll always stay anyway." They'd had their rough patches, nights when Noah was inconsolable and they snapped at each other from exhaustion. Moments when Camille caught herself waiting for him to disappear, and he caught himself reaching for his phone instead of reaching for them. But each time, they'd found their way back to each other. To this small family they were building, one day at a time. "Ice cream," Noah announced from his perch, having spotted the vendor near the park entrance. After lunch, both parents said simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. "We're becoming one of those couples," Camille observed. "The kind that finish each other's sentences. The kind that prioritize vegetables over dessert." "Speak for yourself," Adrian said, steering them toward the ice cream cart. "I'm prioritizing my son's happiness over arbitrary food rules." "Adrian Cross, don't you dare." But he was already ordering 3 small cones, Noah clapping his hands in triumph from his shoulder seat. When he handed Camille hers, vanilla with rainbow sprinkles, exactly what she would have chosen, she shook her head but accepted it anyway. They found a bench in the small park adjacent to the market, Noah contentedly demolishing his ice cream while getting most of it on his clothes. Other families dotted the grass, kids on swings, parents chasing toddlers, teenagers playing frisbee with casual grace. "Do you ever think about Barcelona?" Adrian asked quietly, watching Noah attempt to share his cone with a curious squirrel. Camille considered the question. 6 months ago, Barcelona had represented freedom, possibility, escape from a life that felt too small. Now, it felt like a dream that belonged to someone else. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "I wonder what would have happened if I'd gotten on that plane." And she trailed off, watching as Noah laughed at something ridiculous Adrian had done, or the way he sang him to sleep when he had nightmares, and she couldn't imagine them anywhere else. Noah had successfully convinced the squirrel to approach, and both parents tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But the little boy simply offered the animal his cone with the generous spirit of someone who'd never known scarcity. "I love you," Adrian said suddenly, the words spilling out like they'd been held back too long. "Not the way I did before, when it was all intensity and drama and trying to prove something. I love you the way you organize Noah's socks by color. I love you at 3 in the morning when you're patient with him teething, even though you're exhausted. I love you for giving me the chance to become the man I never knew I could be." Camille's breath caught. They'd been careful with those words, both afraid of the weight they carried, the promises they implied. "I love you too," she said quietly. "I love you for learning how to make perfect formula, for reading the same bedtime story 17 times without complaint. I love you for choosing us every day, even when it's hard." Noah had given up on the squirrel and was now attempting to climb down from the bench, his sticky hands reaching for the grass below. Both parents moved to help him, their movements synchronized in the way that came from months of shared parenting. As they walked home through the tree-lined streets of Silver Springs, Noah between them holding both their hands, Camille reflected on how different this life was from anything she'd planned. There had been no grand romantic gesture, no dramatic declaration of forever, just 2 broken people learning to trust again, held together by love for a little boy who had somehow made them both better than they'd ever been alone. The airport felt like a lifetime ago, that moment when everything hung in the balance and the future could have gone a dozen different ways. But standing in her own front yard now, watching Adrian help Noah water the flowers she'd planted in spring, Camille knew that some destinations were worth missing your flight for. Some love stories don't end with, and they lived happily ever after. They end with and they chose each other again today, and they'll probably choose each other tomorrow too. What would you do if love knocked on your door at the exact moment you'd given up on it? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation means a lot to us. So the story is over, our wonderful friends. Are you still here at this hour? If you are, there's something in this journey that has touched your heart in a way you maybe didn't expect. Let's look at it together, from a perspective that has no right or wrong. This story isn't just about a billionaire and a mother or the little boy who brought them back together. It's about how healing often comes disguised as the hardest choice you'll ever make. It's about how the moment you think everything is lost can be the same moment life quietly hands you a second chance. As the anthropologist Margaret Mead once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, Committed citizens can change the world. And sometimes that group is just you and the tiny hand you're holding. Maybe you've been where Adrian was, so busy running from your own fear that you didn't realize you'd left love behind. Maybe you felt like Camille, believing that asking for help would mean admitting you weren't enough. But here's the truth this story gently reminds us of. Real love doesn't look perfect. It isn't always fireworks and grand gestures. It's showing up again and again, even when you're tired, even when you're scared, even when you're sure you'll fail. If you take anything from this, let it be this. It's never too late to reach out your hand. It's never too late to choose someone, even if you've chosen wrong before. The real happy endings don't come from flawless plans. They come from ordinary mornings, shared ice creams, and the quiet courage to try again. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. And if you feel like it, leave a comment. Tell us what this story stirred up in you, because your voice, your story, is part of this healing too.